Sergey Viktorovich, a question for you. Information has appeared in the media that the U.S. President's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, together with Kushner, are going to come to Moscow in the coming days and meet with Vladimir Putin. How can you comment on this? And what does Moscow expect from the new round of consultations on Ukraine? And are there any shifts at all in the negotiations?
President Putin has repeatedly, including over the last couple of weeks at various events, confirmed our position on openness to negotiations on Ukraine. If these negotiations are of a serious nature, and if the persons interested in such negotiations are truly ready for them and have something to say, I will just note in parentheses why I emphasize specifically the seriousness of any initiatives. For example, once again, President Macron stated that he will definitely contact Putin within a few weeks. This is not the first time he has said this. Well, first of all, we are all adults, and even more so when adults hold state posts, and even more so when they want to discuss issues of war and peace. Then one probably just needs to propose the appropriate contacts. But when, like Mr. Macron, someone states, I will be talking, we will have to talk to Putin anyway, and in a few weeks I will propose something there. Well, it's not serious. This is working for the public, working, I don't even know, microphone diplomacy, megaphone diplomacy, which has never led to anything good. President Putin, on the contrary, is always open to a serious conversation. And all previous meetings with President Trump's special envoy, Mr. Witkoff, and recently Mr. Kushner joined him, all these meetings were serious, concrete, aimed at dealing with the root causes of the Ukrainian crisis and agreeing on ways to overcome these root causes, because otherwise no stable, long-term peace can be expected. And those who are talking now, the Europeans constantly, Germany, the British even more so, that the number one priority is a ceasefire for 60 days on a permanent basis. This is all, of course, not serious, although we are ready to conduct a conversation even with these representatives. But when they say that everything else besides a ceasefire is secondary, it is clear what we are talking about. We are talking about, once again, bargaining for additional time in order to support the Kyiv regime, to preserve its essence. And strictly speaking, all the initiatives that Europe is discussing, including those discussed in Paris, with the participation of Messrs. Witkoff and Kushner, all these initiatives are aimed only at preserving the current Nazi regime in that part of Ukraine, which they hope will remain after a settlement, which obediently carries out the will of the West, primarily the will of Brussels, the EU and NATO Brussels. And this collective Brussels is interested in preparing for war against the Russian Federation. They talk about it openly. This is what our European colleagues want. But from our previous contacts with the United States, starting with the summit in Anchorage and during subsequent contacts through Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner, we see that the United States understands the unreality of such a scenario. They want to suppress any attempts regarding dragging Ukraine into NATO, and they understand perfectly well that without solving the issue related to the fate of those people living in Crimea, Novorossiya, and Donbass, who categorically reject the Kyiv regime and therefore express their attitude toward returning to Russia. Without solving this issue, nothing will work either. And the Americans understand this. I repeat once again, we are open to contacts with Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner. The President has met, I believe, 6 times with President Trump's special representative. And I am sure that if they show such interest, then this interest will be met with understanding. As for the part of your question about what progress there is in the negotiations, we do not know. If we are talking about the negotiations, I mentioned they remained in Paris, between the coalition of the willing, or whatever it's called, with the participation of Zelensky and with the invitation of Witkoff and Kushner, they released their final document, or rather a declaration of intent, I would say, which the United States did not join. And we do not yet know any specific information about what was actually there and what stands behind this declarative document. So if our American colleagues are interested in briefing us on their impressions, of course, this is of interest to us, especially considering that our contacts with the Americans on Ukraine are based on the solid foundation of Alaska, where an understanding was reached, shared by both the American and Russian sides.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Milana Golovany from Ukrainian media outlet Liga.net. Secretary General, after the Orishnik ballistic missile hit on Lviv, the fire was visible near the Russian border. If Russia attack with the same missile NATO territory tomorrow, will NATO respond?
Yes, but we also respond now, because this is already terrible. The Russian missiles are weapons of death and mass and destruction. And we have seen this now when they were used on Lviv the other day. And I find this terrible. We have seen last night, again, hundreds of drones and tens of missiles hitting Ukraine. And particularly now hitting the civilian infrastructure, innocent civilians. This has nothing to do with the combat on the front line. This is just creating panic and death among the general Ukrainian population. And it is evidence of the atrocities the Russians are willing to go to. So that is why I'm so inspired to try to do everything to make sure you guys have the interceptors necessary to take out the missiles wherever you can. And please, also here to the parliamentarians, work with your governments to dig deep in your stockpiles and to find the necessary interceptors for Patriot system, for NASAM system, for SAM-T systems, because they are urgently needed by the Ukrainians. This is why I agreed with President Trump on this Pearl initiative in July, because yes, Europe has a lot, but after 3-4 years of war, a lot of the stockpiles in Europe have been depleted, so we have to rely more on what is still in the stockpiles in the United States, and there's still, luckily, a lot left there, and that's crucial for Ukraine, paid for by European and Canadian allies. That's this Pearl initiative. This is why we are doing that, because your fight is our fight. You have to survive this war. We have to make sure that we can end this war as soon as possible and get to a full peace deal, or if necessary, a long-term ceasefire, and to stop the fighting and the killing. By the way, let's not forget that the Russians at the moment are losing massive amounts of their soldiers thanks to the Ukrainian defense, the staunch Ukrainian defense. In months, this is 20 to 25,000 Russians dead. I'm not talking seriously wounded, killed, dead. 20 to 25,000 a month. When you compare that to the Afghan war in the 1980s, they lost 20,000 in 10 years. Now they lose these amounts and more in 1 month. So that's also unsustainable on their side. But you can be assured that that is why I'm so much motivated to work with President Zelensky and European and Canadian and US allies to make sure you've got what you need to keep yourself strong in the fight, but also strong in the negotiating table.
Mr. Secretary General, does Ukraine need to win the war, not just survive it?
I mean, when you look at the moment, I think we have to bring Ukraine to a place where the president knows that security guarantees are in place, that the Russians will never attack again. But that then will lead to a very sensitive discussion about territory. And the sensitive discussion about territory is something only the Ukrainian people can decide. That's not for me to decide. But for the Ukrainian president and the Ukrainian leadership to be able to strike a deal one day with the Russians, hopefully. If the Russians come to the table and are willing to play ball, which they are not at the moment. Their reaction to the meeting in Paris was this Oreshnik missile, you could argue. So they are clearly at this moment not serious about negotiating. But we have to make sure the moment that these talks start, that the Ukrainian leadership has the guarantee that the security guarantees are in place so that the Russians will never try to attack again.